Probiotics, most people now know as quote unquote friendly bacteria. But a lot of people somehow don't know that if we have leaky gut, then friendly bacteria, if they get through the wall of the gut, can be viewed as invaders. So be careful what we wish for. Prebiotics, we think, are the fiber that friendly bacteria need to ferment to make more of themselves. And way back when, our great-great-grandparents ate whole foods, but they ate them whole. And I think we've missed out on that incredible teaching, and that we ate, obviously, for this body, but in the process, we were also eating leftovers for these friendly bacteria, the microbiome.
Hey everyone, Dr. Josh Axe. Welcome to the show. Today I've got Dr. Stephen Gundry on, and we're going to be talking about gut health. We're going to be talking about cellular health and how to live longer and turn back your cellular age a little bit as well. So really excited to have him on today. You probably know Dr. Gundry because he is the best-selling author, actually New York Times best-selling author of several books, including The Plant Paradox, The Longevity Paradox, and more. And his new book called Gut Check. And we're going to really get into today a lot about the dominant role of the gut microbiome, the foundations of disease, and how really you could heal so many areas of your body, everything from your brain to your thyroid to your skin through your gut. And so we're going to get into that. And you also probably know Dr. Stephen Gundry. He is an expert in his field. He's a distinguished cardiac thoracic surgeon turned pioneer nutrition expert. And you can also follow him on his best in class podcast as well, the Dr. Gundry Show. So Dr. Gundry, welcome to the show today.
Thanks again, Josh. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Well, I'm excited to dive into gut health, but before we do that, I'd love to talk a little bit more about longevity, or maybe we make this first question one where we're combining the two. But let's talk about really how important our gut microbiome is, and really the relationship to our gut to longevity.
Well, as you probably know, one of the cornerstones of longevity research uses a little worm called C. elegans that everything that's ever been tested in terms of, like a supplement or polyphenol or calorie restriction that's been tested in C. elegans has predicted what's going to be found in higher animal models, including rhesus monkeys and hopefully in us. So it's a great model because it's virtually transparent. It lives only about 21 days. So you can do all sorts of manipulations. And one of the things that's fascinating about this little creature is, believe it or not, it has a gut wall. And just like us, that gut wall is only one cell thick. And interestingly enough, it has its own microbiome, although its main food is actually bacteria, so that's kind of funny in itself. But you can actually predict the animal's eventual death and the slowing down of the animal by watching the wall of the gut disintegrate, become porous, become impervious to, among other things, bacteria getting through the wall of the gut. And it's kind of like, hordes at the gates. And that's had a tremendous impression in me over the last 20 odd years of doing this, that Hippocrates, I think, was right, that all disease begins in the gut. But since we're talking about longevity, to paraphrase that, death begins in the gut. And the more I look at the way this system works, the more I'm convinced and impressed that in fact is death begins in the gut. And so what I try to do with with myself and anyone else who listen, is shore up the wall of our gut. And if it's leaking, and most people, believe it or not, have leaky gut, fix it. And that's actually what I do in my practice. So
Wow.
we'll start there.
Yeah, it's a great starting point, and I love that you brought up Hippocrates, obviously, and getting to the root cause, and that's one of the things I think that that you've done such a great job of, is really focusing not on on the symptom, but getting to how do we actually fix and cure the root of the problem. We see this all the time today, whether it be high cholesterol. Well, let's treat the cholesterol. Well, no, let's go and treat the inflammation and the dietary sugar intake and a number of other things. So getting to the actual where it starts in the first place. I read some of your book, The Longevity Paradox, and have done a lot of study in regenerative medicine myself. And one of the things I'm curious about is when you look at some of these, some of these pathways of aging, obviously they're going to throw out terms here that you can feel free to clarify if you want, but whether it be AMPK or mTOR or the importance of sirtuins, I think that might be even more applicable here in terms of how those work in our bodies. But walk me through sort of the, can our gut by the way, here's another, I saw a really interesting study where they went and looked at how quickly different areas of our body age. So a lot of times people look at their chronological versus biological age, but one of the things we're finding is certain organs age faster than others, right? Maybe your gut is the gut of a 40-year-old, but your liver is the liver of a 80-year-old, right? So talk to me about, let's stick with the gut here, and feel free to share whatever you want. But what are some of the things that causes our gut to age more quickly?
Well, when I wrote The Plant Paradox, which is coming up on 7 years ago, I described the 7 deadly disruptors, and a lot of them have stood the course of time. First of all, certainly antibiotics that we take, broad spectrum antibiotics that we take mostly by mistake, because most of the things we take them for are actually viral infections that antibiotics have no effect on. And perhaps more importantly, 70% of all the antibiotics that are used in America are fed to animals to fatten them up and make them grow faster. And those antibiotics are in the flesh of these animals. In fact, recent environmental working group study looked at fast food, about 20 different fast foods in America, and 70% of them had veterinary antibiotics in them. And 100% of them had glyphosate, Roundup. And Roundup, for those who are interested, Monsanto actually patented Roundup not as a weed killer, but as an antibiotic. And it's like, huh? And we're learning more and more that the active forms of glyphosate are pretty doggone good at destroying the bacteria that work on the serotonin tryptophan pathway. And we wonder why, among other reasons, our anxiety and depression levels are through the roof, virtually corresponding with when broad spectrum antibiotics came out and glyphosate was introduced into our food supply. So that's one. Recently saw a patient who I've warned people about, NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like Aleve, like Advil, like ibuprofen. These are actually like literally swallowing a hand grenade. And I have shown the mechanism of how this happens numerous times in my books, including the last one. And the sad thing is, we take this stuff like candy. I'm old enough to remember when Motrin and Aleve and Advil were first introduced, and they were a pharmaceutical drug. And there was literally a black box warning from the FDA that you could not take these drugs longer than 2 weeks because of the known side effects that would actually cause ulcers on the small intestine. Now, fast forward, there's no such black box warning, and we do take these like candy. And if you wanted to blow holes in the wall of your gut, that's a really great way to do it. I can't tell you the number of athletes who get an injury and are prescribed you know, high dose Advil or Aleve or Motrin or Naproxen. And subsequently, the more they take, the worse they feel. And when just had a patient last week actually presented to the emergency room with bleed out in his small intestine from taking high dose Naproxen to treat his chronic pain.
Wow.
And so those are just some ways. If you wanted to break down your gut barrier, that's a good way to start. Not to mention the proton pump inhibitors. Same way with, the PPIs, the antacids that we take. They carry a black box warning that you cannot take these for longer than 2 weeks. And yet I see patients, as you probably do, that have been on these for 10, 15 years, prescribed by their gastroenterologist without quite realizing that, yes, they reduce acid buildup in the stomach. I remember when they came out, we thought they were miraculous, but we didn't realize that mitochondria make ATP by proton pumps, by pumping proteins across the membrane. And lo and behold, just because you can stop protons from being pumped in membranes in the gastric wall to make acid, that doesn't stop these drugs from stopping ATP production in the heart muscle and in the brain. And we now know there's a very strong association with long-term use of these drugs and dementia. And it's like, well, gosh, I guess that makes sense, because we're not only paralyzing the gastric acid secreting cells, we're paralyzing neurons. Oh, well.
Yeah, I saw an episode with Joe Rogan had a Cam Hanes on. Cam Hanes is a former Navy SEAL and a runner. And he's got a great podcast himself, and has people out to his place once he podcasts, and they do some bow hunting and running. And he had been taking, I want to say it was ibuprofen or Advil, like 800 milligrams for a long time, and just had terrible pain in his gut and his joints. And Joe was like, hey, get off of it. Literally got off of it. That was it, because he'd been on it so long, and almost all of his pain went away. It's sort of crazy. A lot of times, people are taking these drugs for certain conditions without knowing and realizing the side effects they're having. I almost feel today it's almost comical when we sit there and watch shows, even the Super Bowl, and there's a drug ad on, and it's like, your face might melt off, your arm might fall off, you might have, and I just don't think people fully hear it anymore. And I want to ask you to help me get to I'd love to hear from you sort of the root cause of a problem here. So one of the things that's happened is I believe that there's a time and a place for medications. But as you said, it's really, I think originally the idea was, we're going to get you on this because you're in an emergency, and we're going to wean you off it very quickly, and then do some lifestyle things or food or other things. But it seems like today, oftentimes people go in and they're on these drugs for either the rest of their life or for a really prolonged periods of time. Why do you think that is? Why there's been this sort of, why that's the state of things?
Well, for one thing, I think drug companies in general don't invest a lot of money into a drug unless it's a drug that they know that you're probably going to be on it, hopefully for the rest of your life. I mean, we just now have to look. We have to look at the Ozempic craze for the latest confirmation that once you start, you're probably on it the rest of your life, and good luck with that. So,
but I would love for you to share. Actually, finish your thought, but I want to come back and ask you a question about Ozempic.
Well, one of the things, let's just get back to the pain relievers for a second, particularly the NSAIDs. So drug companies knew that these NSAIDs would cause breakdown of the small intestinal wall. And they knew this from their animal studies. And I showed some in the plant paradox. They knew that wouldn't be seen because our gastroscopes can't get down into the small intestine, and our colonoscopes can't get up into the small intestine. So, and they knew that this would occur. Now, what happens is, and this kind of gets back to our original discussion, if you have leaky gut or impair the wall of the intestines, then bacteria and other particles can get through this single cell wall. And 80% of our immune system is sitting on the other side of our wall of our gut. And they're there because that's where mischief can come across. So they actually make cytokines, inflammatory signals that says, oh my gosh, we're being invaded and I need to get everybody's attention. And the consequence of those cytokines is pain. Now, when you have pain, of course, you reach for a pain reliever. And it just so happens that they knew that the more Advil you took, the more pain you would have and the more Advil you would take. And so it became like this person, a vicious cycle. And it was all known that it was going to happen.
Wow.
Oh, well.
I mean, and you know, it's incredible. I just got done filming a podcast on the side effect, the unknown common side effects of medications, especially related to nutrient depletion. I mean, it's really outstanding when you look at the number of nutrients depleted in everything from birth control to antibiotics, of course. I mean, really major. But I think that that's something that people aren't. I mean, that's not something that the drug companies are mentioning, right? They're mentioning certain potential, bloating or upset stomach, but they're not necessarily mentioning all of the other things like the nutrient depletion that's happening. Talk to me about Ozempic a little bit. What from your research, what are some of the side effects there that maybe people aren't fully aware of?
Well, maybe Southern California is the Ozempic capital of the world. I'm not sure, but
Probably.
What I've seen, first of all, we have to realize that there has never, ever been in the history of weight loss drugs a safe long-term weight loss drug. Ever. Everyone has subsequently been withdrawn from the market because of usually disastrous side effects that certainly weren't anticipated, maybe, when all these drugs were first released. So we have to keep that in mind. Number two, so these are, most of them are GLP-1 inhibitors, agonists, sorry. And they, of course, do work by slowing gastric emptying. They also work, interestingly enough, by increasing insulin levels. And I, for one, don't want increased insulin running around in my body. In fact, I spend my career trying to reduce people's insulin levels. And yet, most people don't know that Ozempic, one of its effects is to increase insulin production. And I see it in every one of my patients who comes in that I've seen before they went on Ozempic, and every one of them develops, believe it or not, insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia while on these drugs. Wow. And when I show them that, a few of them will go, what? Yeah, I don't want that. I say, yeah, I don't either. Tell you what, let's stop it. I know you don't want to, but let's stop it. And, I'll see you back in 6 weeks and let's redraw. And sure enough, the insulin levels come back down. But the part two of that is that there are studies in humans that show that up to 44% of the weight loss that people experience, and let's not kid ourselves, the weight loss is quite impressive, is muscle mass. And
wow.
If you, and this is why when these folks stop it, their weight comes right back up. There's a recent study published last month looking at people who were on Ozempic, followed for a year. At 6 months, half the group was switched to a placebo shot. They didn't know, which was which. And both groups initially, when they were both on Ozempic, they lost about 20 pounds in 6 months. Pretty impressive. The group that was getting the placebo, still believing that they were getting the shot, in the next 6 months regained half of the weight, even though they were believing they were still getting Ozempic. And that's just in 6 months. So they overcame the placebo effect. Oh, I'm not going to be hungry because I'm still getting the shot, but they regained the weight. Because, as you and I know, we sell our calories primarily to our muscles. And if 40% of them are gone, there's nobody to eat these calories when you come off of the drug. And that's what I've seen in several of my patients. They number one, they'll notice that their muscles are shrinking. I've got actually a good friend of the family who went on this, a woman, and we were actually visiting their house down in San Diego, and she said, I'm so happy with my weight loss. I've lost 25 pounds and I've really struggled, but look, she was showing me her thigh. She said, I don't have any muscles in my thighs anymore. What do you think about that? I go,
oh,
yeah, that's what you're paying for.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's crazy. One of the things that when I was most concerned when I started seeing the faces of people who had been on Ozempic for a period of time. In fact, anyone watching or listening to this, you can go on, do a simple search on your search engine for Ozempic face. I mean, and I've spent a lot of my career studying Chinese medicine and Ayurveda.
Yeah.
And even if, whether it's Eastern or Western medicine, when you see that sunken in, it's typically a sign of malnourishment. And so there's something, I think there are things going on in side effects of Ozempic we're probably not aware of yet that I'm sure we'll uncover over the next few years.
Yeah, I've had 2 patients who have had sudden gallbladder attacks, had to have an emergency cholecystectomy. And if you actually look at the package insert, that's one of the side effects. I actually have a patient, a woman, who has a family history of medullary thyroid carcinoma, who is taking Ozempic. And it's like, what? I mean, Ozempic use is associated with medullary thyroid cancer and even an increased risk of pancreatic cancer. And yet,
I just think people need to get on the plant paradox and follow, one of your food plans. Because, I mean, the reality is if you eat a diet that's mostly, meat and then, some good low glycemic produce, you're going to lose weight very quickly. Just walking. So it's, yeah. Well, another thing, one last thing I want to mention here about Ozempic is the, in a way it ages you, right? I know obviously you've focused a lot of your career, which I'm very excited about, this longevity, right? And living longer. And, one of the primary reasons why people age is loss of muscle mass. And so I don't think people realize how much damage they're doing to themselves by losing muscle mass. It's essential to slow aging.
Yeah, these super old people in the blue zones, one of the things that's remarkable about them is they really keep their muscle mass. Now, most of the blue zones are in hilly communities. In fact, when I was a professor at Loma Linda for many, many years, Loma Linda means beautiful hill in Spanish. But all of these communities are in hilly communities, and they're walking up and down hills kind of all day long, every day. And they maintain muscle mass. You see these sheep herders in Sardinia who are clambering up the hills with their flock, and they're 95 years old, and they can go faster than I can. It's like, holy cow, slow down, would you? But yeah, they're lean, and they're mean, and they're really sinewy.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I want to talk a little bit about longevity here as well. I was listening to a podcast you did recently on urolithin A, and this sort of I don't, whether it's a postbiotic or not. I actually don't think it's actually a postbiotic. I think that's something, but that's debatable. But I do think that it's an incredible compound created that comes from legic acid. And so I'd love to talk about that, but I'd also love for you to share a few other compounds and maybe even what you're drinking. You're drinking this beautiful red, looks like some sort of pomegranate or dragon fruit or some sort of super antioxidant drink there. Well, let's start there. What are you drinking, Dr. Gundry?
So that's a combination of my newest product, a shameless plug here, NitroPulse, which is a bunch of nitric oxide producing plant compounds. And also my brand new phytocollagen complex, which is actually all the amino acids that make up collagen that are actually from plants rather than dead animal collagen, and some vitamin C. So, and it tastes delicious, by the way. Shameless plug. So
all good. All good. So let's talk about some maybe compounds that are known, some that are unknown when it comes to helping us stay younger longer.
So I am a big fan of urolithin A, and I'm a big fan of Timeline Nutrition. I have no relationship with them, but one of the interesting things, particularly when I was writing Gut Check, is that we know that egalic acid is a polyphenol, and it's certainly present in pomegranates, it's present in raspberries, it's present in walnuts. But we used to think that it was a miracle in itself. But what is really miraculous is you probably need about 4 different species of bacteria that will take egalic acid and convert it with each step. Each bacteria, as I talk about in Gut Check, there's an assembly line of bacteria that we really didn't realize was so complex. Very much like an assembly line on a car. And bacteria number 1, let's just say, takes egalic acid and ferments it and poops out compound number 2, which isn't particularly active, but is needed for bacteria number 2 to eat, to make compound number 3, which then bacteria number 4 needs to eat. And then you finally poop out urolithin A. Well, so what? Well, 17 to 20% of us mortal human beings have those bacteria and make urolithin A. But if you look at super old people, 95 and above, anywhere from 50 to 70% of these people make urolithin A. So you go, wow, that's pretty doggone interesting. I guess I want me some of that stuff. So I happen to think it's we know from really good human research that urolithin A does make mitochondrial autophagy, recycle them. And in the process of recycling mitochondria, you get more biogenesis. Now, I happen to think that urolithin A is a pretty good mitochondrial uncoupler, but we don't have to go down that road today. But the point is, if you like the mitochondrial theory of aging or the mitochondrial dysfunction theory of aging, and I like it, then repairing your mitochondria, making more mitochondria, seems like a really good idea. So, and there's even studies, for instance, in humans, that urolithin A consumption, 500 milligrams a day, will actually build muscle mass and build strength, even if you're not actively training. So yeah, so I think that's just one way to look at this. Um, I like, as you probably do, the mitochondrial theory of aging.
Yeah.
I think we can take that as deep as we want to go. Certainly, we've destroyed our mitochondrial ability to function for so many reasons. I wrote a whole book called The Energy Paradox, how pretty much our modern ultra processed food is probably the best way to poison a mitochondria ever developed, and yet that's what we eat. And it's also one of the best ways to poison our microbiome or starve our microbiome. And I think the two are linked. I think, and there's now more and more evidence that our microbiome directly communicates to their sisters, the mitochondria. They're both bacteria of origin. So the more I can do to make my microbiome happy and make my mitochondria happy, hopefully I'll be one of those guys climbing a hill at 95 herding my sheep.
Yeah, I love it. Well, one of the things that you said a couple things. One, when it comes to anti-aging, there are, two areas. Now, there's many areas we can focus on, but two I want to touch on that I think you and I both agree are incredibly important. One is the gut. The other is the health of our cells, right? And it's interesting. And you had mentioned a certain percentage of the population, nearly 80 or somewhere around that 80%, they're not turning this ellagic acid into urolithin A, right? So,
Right.
and this is true with a lot of things. I mean, Jordan Rubin and I were talking this past week about some research we'd read over the past, few months of just the number of, you just read it in study after study. I think if you pay attention to the pattern, but it's like, well, there are a certain percentage of people don't have the gut bacteria for certain types of methylation. I know that can be cellular and that's related to other things, but there are a lot. Your gut health affects every organ in the body, as you've mentioned. It's incredibly important. And so what are some ways that people, let's say somebody realizes, okay, I have leaky gut, or my gut is not healthy, and that's causing me to age prematurely. Well, what are some of the top tips or foods or things they can start implementing now in order to start turning back the clock in their gut?
Well, I think, like I talk about in Gut Check, one of the seminal studies recently about what to eat to improve gut health came out of the husband and wife team at Stanford, the Sonnenbergs. And it's I think, a really eye-opening study. So everybody knows that prebiotic fiber, soluble prebiotic fiber is the favorite food of gut bacteria. It's the ultimate. And so they took some healthy, quote, volunteers, and they gave them a lot of prebiotic fiber. In this case, it was in the form of inulin. And those who don't know inulin, it's in sunchokes, it's in asparagus, it's in like radicchio, that Italian red chicory family. And it's actually a pretty cool prebiotic. I'm a big fan of it. So they gave these people a lot of inulin, and they looked at their gut microbiome diversity. And just for our listeners, the more diverse your microbiome, the better. Just the more your ecosystem is a teeming rainforest, the better. So they looked at gut diversity, and then they looked at inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein. And lo and behold, despite giving them all this prebiotic fiber, their gut microbiome diversity did not increase, and their C-reactive proteins, among other markers, didn't come down. And they go, well, geez, we're giving these guys everything they need. So they said, well, I think we'll give this to another group of people, and we're going to have them eat fermented foods. Now, in this study, it was mostly yogurts and kefirs, but it could be vinegar. It's fermented food. It could be sauerkraut or kimchi. And let's see if that made a difference. And lo and behold, the addition of these fermented foods, and I argue that what they were getting wasn't living probiotics, they were getting postbiotics.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, the International Commission has decided that dead bacteria now can be classified as postbiotics. Interesting. But these carry signals. And lo and behold, when they got the prebiotics with these fermented foods or fermented food products, then and only then their gut diversity increased and their inflammatory markers decreased. So it's this 1-2 punch that is really important. So,
well, Dr. Gundry, I'd love for you to explain for everybody who, and I think we have a number of people who probably understand this and are educated, but a number who aren't, and I'd like you to talk to define for us and describe the relationship: probiotics, prebiotics, postbiotics, and if I could throw the fourth in there, of course, parabiotics.
Yeah, I think if anybody had known how complicated this was going to get, we wouldn't have used these words in the first place.
Yeah.
So, probiotics, most people now know as quote unquote friendly bacteria. But a lot of people somehow don't know that if we have leaky gut, then friendly bacteria, if they get through the wall of the gut, can be viewed as invaders. So be careful what we wish for. Prebiotics, we think, are the fiber that friendly bacteria need to ferment to make more of themselves. And way back when, our great-great-grandparents ate whole foods, but they ate them whole. And I think we've missed out on that incredible teaching, and that we ate, obviously, for this body, but in the process, we were also eating leftovers for these friendly bacteria, the microbiome. And these leftovers of what we didn't digest, there was plenty that got down into our lower small intestines and into our colon, where most of our fermentation fat happens. And there was plenty of food for these guys. And they, in turn, produced compounds from this fermentation that have been called postbiotics. If you want to call them bacterial poop, if you want to call them bacterial farts, that's fine with me. So we now know that there are gaseous postbiotics that are called gasotransmitters or gasomessengers, and those include hydrogen gas, methane gas, carbon dioxide, nitric oxide, sulfur dioxide. So, and these actually are communication systems between the gut microbiome and primarily our mitochondria and our neurons, among other things, and our immune system. Then there's the soluble forms, particularly short-chain fatty acids, like butyrate, like acetate, like propionate. And one of the things that was fascinating to me in writing Gut Check is that most of the butyrate-producing organisms, and for those who don't know, butyrate is kind of the holy grail of short-chain fatty acids. Our colonic cells have to have butyrate to survive. Most of their energy is derived from butyrate. Butyrate is absorbed, and a lot of neurons are dependent on getting enough butyrate to function properly. But what's interesting is most butyrate-producing bacteria can't take prebiotics and make butyrate. They have to have precursors of butyrate. They have to have other short-chain fatty acids like acetate or propionate. And you got to have other bacteria to do that. Or what cultures have done, ancient wisdom, almost everybody fermented everything because back in the good old days, that was the only way to store food, was to ferment the sugars. And in the process, as you and I know, broke down a lot of the mischievous plant compounds that are used as plant defense systems against being eaten. And so, and the other cool thing that I've written about recently is polyphenols are far more bioavailable if they're fermented first.
Yeah.
I mean, and so fermented polyphenols, like red wine, it's a pretty good idea in moderation. And if you don't drink, don't start, but we won't go down that path. So
Yeah.
does that help?
Yeah.
And let me finish off. So
Yeah.
we know that I was just hiking my dogs this morning before coming to the office, and we have a couple of male rescues. And they, as anyone who owns male dogs know, love to sniff whatever they can smell. Mm-hmm. And they are fascinated with what they are smelling. And we're going, geez, come on, give it up. And then, of course, they mark that spot. And we now realize that sniffing they're actually receiving messages from Fido down the street. They know exactly what he ate. They know when he was here. They know, how he feels today. And they get all that from the smell of that urine. And yet we think it's hard to believe that the cell wall of a bacteria, a dead bacteria, could contain important information that other bacteria in our gut read, very much like my dog sniffing urine and going, oh yeah. And one of the best examples is Akkermansia muciniphila is one of the keystone species in our mucus in our gut. And you can show that dead Akkermansia is quite effective in getting the responses that you're looking for. And living Akkermansia is also very good. And they actually have kind of different effects. And so we now know that probably most of the effects of probiotics are not the living bacteria, most of which are killed by gastric acid, but it's the information in these dead bacteria, and it's in the products they've made during the fermentation of those sugars in the yogurt or the kefir or the cheese that carries the information. And that's, it's exciting.
It's good. We used to, Jordan and I used to call this the power of sour, when we're talking about some of these postbiotics, oftentimes they've got their acids, they're giving off that sour flavor. And so there's, our Western diet is just mostly sweet and salty, and we're missing out on the sour and bitter and a lot of the health benefits there. I wanted to ask you about cellular regeneration, as we think about how do we start getting our cells healthier, regenerating our cells. I know you talked about the mitochondria earlier, but what are some of the top ways we can start to regenerate our cells and start to multiply and improve the health of our mitochondria?
Well, as you know, I'm a big fan of time-restricted eating. I think I was the first to write about it back in the early 2000s, and it's actually a hilarious story. I had a whole chapter on time-restricted eating because at that time, usually from January through June of every year, I follow an OMAD diet, 1 meal a day diet. I eat all my calories in a 2-hour window from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. And I do that during the week, and I do that for 6 months. And I had been doing that in the late 1990s. And so when I wrote Dr. Gundry's Diet Evolution, I had an entire chapter on time-restricted eating and its benefits, which were known about back then. And my editor, who was at Random House, said, there's a lot of crazy stuff in this book, but this is the craziest. No one is going to do this. No one's going to believe you. And I said, but look at all the references. And hey, I've been doing it on myself now for about 5 years and it works. She said, this is just nuts. She said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 2 pages to make your case. That's it. Chapter's gone. You get 2 pages, stick it wherever you want. So we did. And I was speaking at the Mind Body Green Symposium in Arizona before COVID. And my editor from Random House was in the audience, Heather Jackson. And she comes up to me and she said, congratulations on, everything that's happened to you. She said, can you ever forgive me about taking your time-restricted chapter away, eating chapter? I said, yeah, it's okay.
That's so funny.
I should have known. You were so right about this. So, yeah. So getting back to cellular regeneration, I think ketones are really important signaling molecules. Ketones are not the world's greatest fuel, and I spent 2 books trying to convince everybody that they are not the world's greatest fuel, but they're really important signaling molecules. And they're signaling molecules that simplistically tell cells, tell mitochondria, that it looks like times are rough. It looks like we don't really know when the next meal is coming from. And we need to look at every cell and every mitochondria and decide if this cell is pulling its own weight, if this mitochondria is up to snuff, and if not, then we ought to recycle that cell, do autophagy. We ought to tell the mitochondria to mitophagy, to recycle itself, not explode like apoptosis, and in the process, actually make more mitochondria that don't have to work as hard, and that's called mitochondrial uncoupling. And this was worked out in 2000 by a PhD by the name of Brand, who wrote a brilliant little paper called Uncoupling to Survive. And it basically put out this theory that if times are tough, you better get all hands on deck and get rid of everybody else who isn't pulling their own weight. And it turns out super, super old people have the most uncoupled mitochondria. So there you go. So I think time-restricted eating is a really useful way of extending the length of time that you can be in ketosis and receive those signals. And this has been confirmed at the National Institutes of Aging with the famous rat studies duplicating the rhesus monkey studies from Wisconsin, and looking at was actually the compression of eating windows that had all the beneficial health effects. So why not?
Yeah. There's a lot of research. I know if anybody reads any longevity books, including yours, there's going to be 2 pages or a couple chapters on eating less to live longer, or the time restricted eating window. And there is I agree with you. There's some great research on some of that. I do wonder, I have my own hesitancies about it for all people. I think that when I look at, personalized diets, I think some people do better than others on time restricted eating. I think some people maintain muscle mass better than others. And I also think that for everybody, though, I just want to throw this out there, is like, even when you look at religious communities, for instance, like, the people of the Jewish faith, the Christian faith, Islam, and I also know people that practice Buddhism. There's fasting in all of these religions, every single one. And the early Christians, they fasted all day, every Wednesday and Friday, and then seasonally. So it was a part of life. And I think that there's a term that you're going to be very familiar with, of course, like, hormesis, right? Or xenohormesis, in terms of what our bodies, it's why cold plunging became so popular out of nowhere, is, this, our bodies adapting and getting better. I just think, for some people, just understanding it's good for your body to be uncomfortable. It's good for your body to have to adapt. You don't want to have to adapt too much where you're damaging it, but our bodies need to adapt. And that's, I think, one of the benefits, along with all the things you talked about, autophagy. And of course, you didn't mention this. I was waiting for you to, but you probably didn't want to keep you probably wanted to give me time to ask the next thing. But these senescent cells, also known as zombie cells, I mean, as we age, we start accumulating more and more and more of these types of cells. And so talk to us a little bit about what senescent cells are and why it's so important that we start to clear those out through autophagy and other means.
Yeah, there are these, the term is caught that they're zombie cells. They're the undead, or the non-living undead. And they literally are these cells that just kind of refuse to die. And sadly, they promote some localized inflammation. Now, there's actually, you may have seen just last month, I think in January, it's been shown that Curcetin and a prescription medication, I'm blanking on the name right now, can definitely cause senescent cells to die properly and have a proper burial. But there was a recent paper looking at whether this combination would change senescent cells in the brain. And bad news, it was ineffective at changing, at killing off senescent cells in the brain. And the thought was that it probably didn't get across the blood-brain barrier. And back to the drawing board. So it may be that the more we practice telling cells to properly recycle themselves, autophagy, self-eat, and not explode is the way to go. I'm a fan of the theory of. Are you aware of the cell danger theory? Comes out of San Diego.
Possibly share with us.
There's an interesting theory that mitochondria, because they are ancient engulfed bacteria, have been put in charge not only of producing energy, but also the main system of sensing trouble and of letting other cells nearby know of the trouble. And they actually, if you like this theory, release free ATP into the surrounding interstitial spaces to warn off other cells of impending danger and to isolate that cell. And the theory is that the mitochondria, if they're constantly exposed to danger signals, and our lifestyle and diet is perfect for constantly exposing mitochondria to danger signals, that the normal cellular response to damage and then repair never gets completed. And this theory says we're always in a chronic, low-grade cellular defense system where nothing gets repaired. And it's kind of a cool theory. And so I happen to think that the signal for this is, among other things, a dysbiotic microbiome and a leaky gut. And so back to where we started from, get yourself a much happier, friendlier, diverse microbiome and stop tearing holes in the wall of your gut. And these signals will stop.
Yeah, there was some related writing and research that I was looking into on, and of course this starts in the gut, but looking at the cell signaling, and part of the issue there is that some cells don't realize they get so again, the signaling and communication between cells gets so poor that the body isn't sending, the right cells to clean up and get rid of the senescent cells.
Yeah.
And there's a brilliant doctor that you might like to talk to at some point. I had him on my podcast. His name's Dr. Rafael Gonzalez. He's a scientist out of UC Irvine, and he specializes in stem cells and NK cells. And they're doing some incredible research with NK cells, and they're using patients' own NK cells. They're culturing them and multiplying them, and using that to treat a number of diseases, specifically those with senescent cells, and seeing some really, really good results because, they're activating these NK cells and flooding the body with more of them, which are helping eliminate a lot of these senescent cells. And so anyways, but of course, there are certain foods like mushrooms are at the very top of the list for cellular communication and helping activate some of those NK cells, which are, of course, a lot of these things are just, they're so connected to the gut microbiome. And so anyways, but I have one more question, but before I do that, I want to mention everybody's got to check out Dr. Gundry's new book called Gut Check. And it's fantastic. He sent me a digital copy. I was reading it this morning and throughout the day today, and just so impressed. And so if you're a person and you want to heal, and I want to mention this too when it comes to gut health, it's not just about gut health. Remember, leaky gut affects every organ in your body. Every person with autoimmune disease has severe leaky gut. Of course,
absolutely.
if you have inflammatory bowel disease, you of course also have severe leaky gut. But migraine headaches, food sensitivities and intolerances, joint issues, these are all related to leaky gut. In fact, one of the things one of my favorite chapters was on hormones. So like a lot of times when people hear hormonal health, they never think of gut health. Well, it impacts it greatly. And that's going to be one of my last questions. Actually, I may have two, but so I would say this. So I want to encourage you to check out Dr. Gundry's book. It's called Gut Check. Amazon, bookstores nationwide. It's a really, really great book for not only gut health, but immune system health, hormonal health, and so much more. But talk to us about that surprising relationship between the gut and our hormones.
Yeah, I guess, we keep going down this hole in the gut. Long ago, we thought that the gut was just a hollow tube and, we swallowed stuff and magic happened and what we didn't need, we pooped out the rear end. And then we discovered that there were neurons in the gut, so many that, there were more neurons in the gut than there were in the spinal cord. And we go, geez, what are those guys doing down there? And then we go, oh, well, they're making hormones. And now there's a gut-brain connection. And then, lo and behold, with the Human Microbiome Project, we find out that with every passing year, we find out that most of the hormones that we attributed to the neurons making were actually coming from the gut microbiome. And whether they're estrogen or testosterone or, the sex hormones or, feel-good hormones like dopamine or serotonin, the gut microbiome not only is capable of making these, but also modulating these. And we now know that there's an estrobolome in women, there's an estrobolome in men. We know that these gut bacteria, I see a number of them, what we thought their fat cells were making their estrogen as postmenopausal women. And now the research is, well, wait a minute, no, these women have a collection of gut bacteria that are making the estrogen. And holy cow, no wonder there is an association with this microbiome in breast cancer. And then you go and look at breast cancer tumors, and there's a microbiome, in all these cancers. Now, it's controversial which came first, the cancer microbiome or the cancer, or do they feed on each other? I personally like the latter, but yeah. So when we're just getting started in realizing what, these gut bacteria really play a pivotal role in almost every function in us, where it's a mutuality society where we need them and they need us, and where we have not done our part in keeping them happy.
Yeah, it's incredibly important, and so, the message here is take good care of your gut,
Yeah.
as much as you can. And I know Dr. Gundry's new book here, Gut Check, is going to help you do just that. Well, any last words of advice for anybody, Dr. Gundry, who's wanting to get their gut healthy and also turn back the clock?
Yeah, I think the good news is it's never too late. I've seen people literally, and I've written about them, 85 years old with diabetes and coronary artery disease and crippling arthritis who literally reverse these conditions. And one of them, and I've written about, was a 95-year-old cougar who was, dating men in their early 80s and thinking about heading after 70-year-old men. And so it's never too late. And the other thing is that we do turn over our cells very rapidly. We replace about 90% of our cells with a new one every 3 months. And if you think about building new ones with quality material rather than duct tape, like most of us do, the future is unlimited. But it takes work. Let's not kid around about it. And guess what? You can't see a leaky gut in a day or two. It's not a miracle cure. I wish it was, but you can fix it, and that's the good news. It's fixable.
That's very good news. Well, Dr. Gundry, I want to say thanks so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for listening and participating. And hey, if you're not subscribed, don't forget to subscribe here to the podcast. We've got so many great and incredible people like Dr. Gundry who are sharing their wisdom, helping you transform your health. And last thing I do want to mention again, check out Dr. Gundry's book, Gut Check. It's fantastic. And I couldn't recommend it any more. Well, thanks everybody for being a part of the Ancient Health community. Thanks so much to Dr. Gundry for your wisdom today. And we'll see you guys on the next episode.